We had a question. Margaret noted that the rind of the Mountaineer smells like ammonia. I don't know if Hannah could comment on the rind of the Mountaineer cheese.
Yeah, so the Mountaineer rind, it's a natural rind, so it's not wax, it's not anything that's really been, the cheese hasn't been covered by anything unnatural. It's just grown as the cheese is ripened in the cellars or in the cave. I'm not sure at Meadow Creek where they exactly ripen their cheeses, but the smell of ammonia is not particularly normal as long as the cheese itself doesn't have the ammonia smell. If it's just isolated to the rind, which may have picked up some ambient bacteria, either at the dairy or in transit, as long as the cheese isn't discolored or giving off the ammonia smell itself, the rind is perfectly able to be removed from the product, and the cheese is able to be consumed without it. For the specific ammonia smell, I'm not having it on mine. But I do think it could have just come, after the cheese left the dairy or before. As long as the rind is a brownish hue and not speckled with white or blue, I think the product is okay.
We have another question in the chat. Are there famously good cheese years, like there are famously good wine years, since the ingredients for both are so weather dependent?
That's a great question. I think it's probable or possible, but it's not going to be as pertinent or as important as for wine, because the cheese is, beholden on the animal, and the animals graze with what's available in the season. So I think depending on where the cheese is coming from, so where the animals are grazing, like for example, last summer in Oregon, they had wildfires. So I know there's a couple good dairies there, and I imagine that the grass and the quality of what the animals were eating, as well as the air quality and perhaps the quality in the water systems, really played into the overall cheese, as well as when the cheese was aging, there might have been, smoke in the air that really permeated into the product. And now that it's aging, it's kind of held on to that. But I don't think particularly like years, like vintages, but certain cheeses are matured longer. So that plays into it. Otherwise, fresh cheeses are almost immediately consumed. So that would just be, dependent on the cheesemaker, the animals, what they're eating, and where they're eating it.
Okay, another question about the wine. At what temperature should the Chardonnay be kept at and then drunk?
Good question. We'd like to have the wines stored in the mid-50s if you can do that, ideally. The problem I always find in the US is we drink our white wines way too cold and our red wines way too warm. And it's a combination of putting the wine in the refrigerator for too long, or serving it right out of the refrigerator, or the red wine's coming right off the kitchen counter. So the best is to have the white wine cold, but not too cold, where you numb the flavors, the aromas, and the fruits. It will come back if you leave it in the glass. It's always best to even let it sit in the glass regardless for some time, to let it breathe and open up, and let the aromatics really evolve in the glass. But ideally, you want to have the wine in the the mid 40s would be perfect for me. Obviously, that might be warm for some people, but mid 40s, cellar temperature in the 50s is a little bit too warm. You want to be, again, depending what you're eating, the time of year, you might not want it as cold in the winter as in the summer, but you could also, there's different varieties of wine for different seasons and different meals. But the Chardonnay like this, ideally for me, mid to upper 40s is the perfect temperature for me. So if it's in the fridge getting cold, I'd take it out, pour a little bit in a glass, and let it sit for about 15-20 minutes till it gets to a little bit more warmer temperature, and then also allows the wine to open up and express itself a little bit better.
I think in the last pairing we did, or the last conversation we did, there was like a rule that someone mentioned where it's like 10 minutes. Is it 10?
20 minutes.
It's easy to remember, so.
Yeah, 20 minutes for red wine in the fridge and 20 minutes for white wine out of the fridge, right?
Right before consumption, yeah. And then just, follow along and say for the cheese, if it's like a hard cheese, take it out of the fridge. You can take it out a couple hours before. Sometimes, depending on the temperature, it doesn't need to be refrigerated, just needs to be well protected. And then for the next cheese we have, a good hour would be nice to take it out. And then for really creamy, gooey cheeses, an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the ambient temperature. So that way all the milk solids have not solidified, they've become more creamy, and you're able to get the full experience.
I'm seeing lots of comments in the chat about loving the cheese, loving the wine, loving the pairing, which has been wonderful. It was great. We do have a question about, for Michael, how many bottles, loving the wine, how many bottles white and red do you typically produce a year? Does it vary a lot year to year?
It does vary depending on the vintage. I am not shy about not making wines in years that don't meet the quality standards that I want. For example, 2018, I did not make any red wines under my label. The vintage was not good enough. And I only made a couple white wines as well. And that's happened several times over the years. And then in other vintages, I just might not be satisfied with the final blend. And that's why we have, a lot of you know, we have our other label, the Wineworks label, where we have bag in the box and kegs and other different packaging. And that's usually a lot of the wines that I don't want into my brand that we'll put into that. They're perfectly good wines and might be good for some other wineries. But for me, I really strive and want the best wine possible. So fortunately, I can have a second label and declassify wines if I feel it's appropriate. So on this Chardonnay production, we've gotten up to the top production now is about 500 cases a year of this wine. And it's a wine that I'm not, I want it to age. So 2016, I'm pretty sure if you search around Virginia, you're not going to find a winery that's currently selling their 2016 vintage. I'm very fortunate because of the business model that we have here. Making wine for other wineries has allowed the business to operate while I can take my wines and not worry about, cash flow wines, having to quickly put a wine out and not sit on the inventory and not have to sell it too early because we need to get can't let it age and have all that money tied up in inventory. So this is a luxury for a lot of wineries to be able to have a wine from 2016 now be the current release. It allows us to age the wine and release it when it's ready.
Thank you. We have two more questions. One person says they know a little bit about, the proper way to taste a wine, but what about the proper way to eat a cheese? Is there a particular way to fully savor its flavor?
Yeah, great question. So I think like with wine, the first way to taste is with your eyes. So you want to look at the product that you have in front of you. You want to look at the rind, which is the outside of the cheese, and the paste, which is the inside of the cheese. You kind of want to observe what you see. You want to observe how they blend together, if there's a cream line, if it's a soft cheese, or if there's just a natural rind, or if there's a wax like for a Gouda. Then you're going to want to smell it like you smell a wine. See if it smells either, ammoniated, which is not a good sign, or if you smell kind of musty or earthy, or mushroomy if it's a camembert. And then the next step is to taste it. So taste it by itself, put it in the center of your tongue, breathe into it, taste it, see if it coats your palate, see if it finishes quickly, just like a wine. And then of course, it's a great thing to try, with an accompaniment. So with a bread or with a jam or preserve, and kind of see what flavors are evoked. And then of course the wine as well, taste it with your favorite wine or beer just to kind of see what nuances come out. But overall, just enjoy it, just savor it and appreciate the product, appreciate the work that went into it, and just eat it. It's good stuff.
Thank you. Now we're having some great questions here. And I know the answers to some of them, but I might let you guys answer. Is Michael Shaps available in Charlottesville other than at your winery? And that would include picking it up at Wineworks, which I do. And then are Michael Shaps wines available in Maryland? And I know you can order from the website for all of your wines and have them shipped. So, but if you want to add on that, other places that Michael Shaps winery is available other than Wineworks, which is behind Wegmans, where I go, and the winery where I've also been. Any other places?
Yes, I hope so. We have distribution through our Virginia distributor, Roanoke Valley Wine Company, and the wines are sold in Charlottesville at, besides, I believe, Foods of All Nations. You can find it at Market Street on occasion. You can find it at the Wegmans for sure. So there's different locations. I'm not up to date on all the retailers that have the wines currently, but you can always reach out to our distributor, or you can tell a wine shop to order the wine through Roanoke Valley Wine Company. That's our distributor, and they deliver throughout the Commonwealth. And in Maryland, we are represented by Lanterna. That's the name of our distributor in Maryland. So same thing, you can go into your local retailer and ask for the wines and tell them they can order it through Lanterna, and they could usually have it there within a day or two.
Great, thank you. Okay, and people are saying that Wineworks is a lovely location, very helpful staff, and it's great. And you can just swing by Wegmans and the cheese section, and then go to the winery, to the Wineworks outlet.
Yeah, so we have, as you mentioned, we have the Avon Street location, and then we also have the winery, and both currently have outdoor seating with tents and heaters, so to accommodate everyone during the pandemic. We have very limited indoor seating at Avon Street. And then we also didn't mention we have another winery in the Shenandoah Valley, which if you ever get a chance to go visit, we bought Shenandoah Vineyards a couple years ago, and we're making obviously all the wines there and operating Shenandoah Vineyards, which is a beautiful site if you get a chance to go up to Edinburgh.
Okay, I'm going to close us with one last question because it is getting late in France, and for people that are jet lagged from having come back from flying in this time, and that is just give us a little overview of how you determine which cheeses pair better with reds versus whites.
So I would say that for that question, there's not one blanket answer. I think every varietal has a different characteristic, different nuances, and then whether it's aged in oak, whether it's aged in stainless steel, the age of the wine is pretty tough because from one year to another, it can have a lot of different tastes to it, a lot of different nuances. So you really have to taste the wine you want to pair and then go from there. I think it's really hard to do the reverse and take a cheese and then try to find a wine because this wine that we're gonna, the Chardonnay or the Petit Verdot, which is next, in 2 years could taste completely different. Or right when it, is bottled, it tastes a lot different than it tastes now. So I think it's important to kind of pick the vintage or the moment you want to pair with, and then just taste and try to pick out different notes that you want to highlight, and then go from there. There are, of course, principles to pairing. There's basics that are, usually followed just to start, kind of to lead off your pairing. But it really is subjective and objective to the products you're tasting and the actual way they're tasting in the moment. So it's not an easy answer. It's kind of a vague answer, but it really does fluctuate. Fluctuates with the year and the way the wine is done and the type of wine and where it's grown. Just like the cheeses, there's a lot of variables, and so it's not an exact science. And as we've mentioned in other pairings, it is a pretty subjective. So what we think tastes good might not exactly taste the same to you, or when you get the products at your home, they might not bring up the same things we're talking about. So we do our best, and at the end of the day, if we provide you with 2 good products, we've done our job.
Well, you've done magnificently well with the Chardonnay and the Mountaineer. So now let's turn to the Petit Verdot and the Stilton.